The file opens with the faint grit of old paper sliding against wood, the sound of a classified folder being drawn from a cabinet sealed in silence since the last hours of the Second World War. Its label is brief, almost unassuming. ITER. Joint Defense Action involving U.S. forces, Wehrmacht elements, and priority prisoners. Tyrol. 5 May 1945. For decades, few outside military archives even knew this document existed. It describes an event so improbable that it reads like fiction. The day American soldiers and remnants of the German army fought side by side, defending a medieval Austrian castle full of French VIP prisoners, against a fanatical SS assault determined to kill every last captive before the war's end. This story begins with the final convulsions of World War II, when the battlefield stretched across continents and the world seemed poised to tear itself apart. The first images show exhausted soldiers in chaotic combat, rifles raised, dust swirling around shattered helmets. It was the war's final spring, yet men continued to die in brutal house-to-house fighting. In the midst of this violence, a tiny fortress perched on a hill in the Austrian Alps would become the stage for one of the strangest alliances in modern history. The next images shift to tanks grinding through ruined European streets, American Shermans pushing forward, German armor withdrawing in disarray. In early May 1945, Germany's military machine was collapsing from every direction. Soviet forces stormed across Berlin. The Western Allies raced through Bavaria and Austria. Entire Wehrmacht divisions surrendered without firing a shot. Yet the SS, the Nazi state's darkest arm, refused to yield. For them, defeat meant death, and in those chaotic final days they hunted enemies everywhere, including their own countrymen. This fracture inside Germany would make the events at Castle Itter possible. Then a ship slips beneath the waves in a brief, stark scene. Naval battles raged far from Austria, but each sinking symbolized the same thing: a world consumed. The Atlantic War had nearly starved Britain. The Pacific still burned. Victory and collapse were unfolding simultaneously across the globe. War did not end neatly. It unraveled violently. Fighter planes streak overhead, formations cutting through the sky like iron arrows. Air superiority had made the Allied advance inevitable, but it did not bring order. Germany in May 1945 was in chaos. Roads were clogged with refugees, deserters, and prisoners fleeing execution. The Luftwaffe was gone. The Reich's borders were gone. Its chains of command were shattered. In this vacuum, individual officers often acted alone, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of principle. Bombed-out cities appear in jagged black and white: Munich, Innsbruck, Vienna. The ruins testify to how total the war had become. Concrete dust covered the living and the dead alike. The castle at Itter stood untouched by bombs, but its prisoners often heard distant artillery and saw columns of smoke rising from valleys below. They understood the Reich was dying, but feared they might die with it. Allied troops landing on beaches evoked the long road to this moment. From Normandy to the Rhine, the Allies fought for every mile. Yet even after the Germans formally surrendered in some regions, pockets of SS resistance carried out last-ditch operations. Among their targets were Sonderhäftlinge, special prisoners, held as bargaining chips by the Nazi leadership. Castle Itter held some of the highest value captives in the entire war. The civilians fleeing destroyed towns mirror the desperation filling Austria as the front collapsed. Thousands moved through the mountains, some seeking escape, others hunting weapons, food, or revenge. For the prisoners of Castle Itter, the chaos was both threat and opportunity. Inside the castle were political celebrities and military leaders captured by the Nazis. Former French Prime Ministers Édouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud, General Maurice Gamelin, General Maxime Weygand, Charles de Gaulle's sister, Marie-Agnès Caillot, tennis champion Jean Barotra, other VIPs, translators, and staff. They were not guarded by ordinary troops. They were guarded by SS jailers. Radio operators tapping coded messages appear next, silent witnesses to the nervous signals transmitted between scattered German units. Many Wehrmacht officers listened in disbelief as Berlin's situation reports disintegrated into confusion. Some realized the war was lost and acted to prevent further bloodshed. One of them was Major Josef Sepp Gangl, a Wehrmacht officer stationed near Wörgl. Nurses tending wounded soldiers remind us that even as armies crumbled, medical posts overflowed with the injured. War did not stop for surrender negotiations. Bullets and shells ignored political boundaries. Generals hunched over invasion maps follow, symbolizing the collapsing chain of command. As Hitler raged in his bunker, communications broke down. Orders became contradictory. Some SS units prepared to execute prisoners who might become dangerous witnesses. The men in Castle Itter knew this. They heard SS guards speaking in urgent tones. They saw heavy weapons disappear from storerooms. Something was coming. Prisoners behind barbed wire matched the fear inside the fortress. On May 2, 1945, the SS guards fled the castle without warning, terrified of approaching American forces. But that did not mean the prisoners were safe. Rogue SS units roamed the region, killing perceived traitors, deserters, and prisoners. Abandoned, the VIPs armed themselves with any weapon they could find. Propaganda posters appear, twisted messages of a dying regime insisting on loyalty even as everything crumbled. In Austria, some Nazi fanatics sought a final victory in death. They would soon march on Castle Itter. Submarines at sea represent the war's global scale, the constant struggle for dominance. The castle's story was only a tiny piece of a worldwide conflict, yet it would reveal how fractured the German forces had become. Winter battlefield scenes bring the memory of earlier suffering. But now it was May. Snow still lingered in the alpine shadows, adding a chill to the tension gripping the mountains around Itter. Then victory celebrations in Europe, a reminder of how close the end was. Only 2 days before the battle, German forces in Italy surrendered. On May 5th, just hours after the Castle Itter defenders would fire their last rounds, most German troops in Bavaria laid down their arms. But celebrations meant little inside a castle that expected an SS assault at any moment. The ruins of Berlin come next, the final proof that the Reich was dead. But the SS did not see it that way. In pockets of Austria and Czechoslovakia, they continued fighting, killing, and marching toward any target they believed must not survive the regime's collapse. The VIP prisoners were high-value enemies. Women in factories appear, symbols of the industrial backbone that supported every front. Yet all the production, all the machinery, all the ideology had collapsed into this. A small band of Allied and German soldiers preparing to defend a castle against SS troops in the war's dying hours. Artillery flashes represent the violence still tearing through Europe. Around Itter, nearby villages heard sporadic firing as SS groups skirmished with Wehrmacht defectors. Then American and British officers planning D-Day appear, distant echoes of coordination and strategy. But Castle Itter would not be shaped by planning or doctrine. It would be shaped by individuals making impossible choices in a moral vacuum. Finally, bombers over a city closed the image sequence. A reminder that the world had been torn apart by machines, yet in this one small fortress the final clash would be fought largely with rifles, pistols, and determination. Now the story sharpens. On May 4th, Zvonimir Chuchkovich, a Yugoslav prisoner trustee, escaped the castle and trekked through enemy-held territory to find American help. Meanwhile, Major Gangl, who had secretly begun cooperating with Austrian resistance groups, learned of the abandoned castle and feared the SS would massacre the VIPs. He made contact with Chuchkovich, crossed the lines under white flag and went to the Americans himself. The U.S. forces he reached belonged to the 23rd Tank Battalion of the 12th Armored Division. Their commander, Captain Jack Lee, listened as Gangle described the situation. A castle full of high-ranking prisoners abandoned by the SS but now threatened by a separate SS battalion approaching from the east. Lee made a decision that defied every expectation of the war. He agreed to work with the German officer. Together, they organized a rescue mission. On the morning of May 5th, Lee and a small force of American tankers, accompanied by about 10 Wehrmacht soldiers loyal to Gangle, approached Castle Itter in an American Sherman tank named Bastion Jenny. The VIP prisoners watched in disbelief as Wehrmacht troops arrived alongside American GIs. The two sides had been enemies for years, yet now they exchanged nods, handshakes, cigarettes. None of them fully trusted the situation, but they all understood the stakes. When the SS assault came, it came in waves, fanatical troops determined to kill the prisoners or retake the fortress. They opened fire from forested slopes. The defenders, Americans, Wehrmacht, and French VIPs, took positions along the walls. Some of the French dignitaries insisted on fighting. Jean Barotra, the former tennis champion, sprinted across the courtyard carrying messages under fire. Generals who had once commanded armies now loaded rifles and handed ammunition to American GIs. The Sherman tank guarding the gate was eventually destroyed by a German anti-tank gun, leaving the defenders exposed. Major Gangle was killed by a sniper while protecting former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud. Still, the defenders held on. Hour by hour, they resisted. Low on ammunition, surrounded, exhausted. But the SS could not breach the walls. At last, late in the day, American reinforcements arrived from the 103rd Infantry Division, sending the SS retreating into the mountains. The battle was over. Castle Itter had been held. In the end, the Americans, the Wehrmacht defectors, and the French VIPs walked out together, past the wreckage of Bastion Jenny, past the fallen SS soldiers, past the body of Major Gangle, whom the local Austrians would later honor as a hero against tyranny. In a war defined by destruction, cruelty, and division, the battle for Castle Itter remains a rare moment where enemies set aside their flags and fought side by side against a greater evil. It was the final improbable alliance of the Second World War, proof that in the last hours of chaos, even in a world drowned by violence, individuals could still choose courage, cooperation, and humanity over hatred.